Hey everybody, I want to thank you for checking out the video here today. You should actually soon be thanking yourselves for checking this out and what you're about to learn. My name is Brian Murphy. I'm an herbalist out of Spokane, Washington. And before we dive into the subject at hand here today, I wanted to just give a brief statement on why I practice herbal medicine. And every way I look at it, I kind of end up running it down into three basic things. Ultimately, my goal is to familiarize you and the community on some of the more subtle qualities of the herbs and the foods that we take in on a day-to-day basis in our diet, and from that be able to develop our own awareness, how our body reacts to some of the foods that we eat, whether it's a positive or a negative, and just really develop that connection between our bodies and our minds, and for some of us our souls, and how we connect with the food that we eat, and ultimately to empower you to take charge of your own health care by looking at the foods that we eat every day and be able to make the choices that are going to be best based on your personal needs. And really, this kind of comes down to quite a simple saying that's well known in even the medical professions, is, or especially even in natural medicine, is we should let our food be our medicine, and subsequently our medicine is our food. And from that we can actually glean a lot of what things we take in every day and how that is a benefit for not only the body, because our nutrition relies solely on the food that we eat. And from that we can be able to develop more of a more keen understanding of some of these other foods and how they react in the body, and ultimately lead us to a more optimal, or ideally a greater balance in our own health, and how our bodies react. So in order to start building this connection between our food and our bodies, I wanted to focus in on something that is quite relatable, really, to each and every one of us in some shape or fashion. And what we have here is something that's been termed herbal energetics. So what this is essentially a model, or really a metaphor, that's evolved over the centuries and through many different regions and civilizations. So from culture to culture, there has been some type of fundamental or common understanding of how the human body responds to changes in the environment, from climate, your diet, the changing of the seasons, and so on and so forth. And so it's these influence of external factors to the human body that create a similar reaction within our bodies. And so over time, it's the herbalists, the doctors of the day, that have communicated this concept really in three simple but profound words, which communicate it so well, I think. And that is, like increases like. What we can start looking at now is, let's look into ourselves. What is the perfect balance for ourselves? What is the ideal environment for us? We could use this metaphor here of the environment to look into ourselves. What is our body's perfect environment? What's the balance with how we're feeling? How does what we eat start affecting us? Well, to start setting the mood here, we can kind of start looking at some of these environmental photos here. So where we're looking at a hot, arid, dry, maybe irritating environment, something that's going to be, a bit excessive on one scale, we start looking now at something that might be slightly excessive on the other scale. Really cold, dry, immobile, maybe depressed, not necessarily in an emotional state, but like in the lack of activity where we're inactive, deficient. Maybe we need to start energizing more in order to create that balance. But maybe we need to look at maybe there's an excess going on. Maybe there's too much accumulation of things that's happening within our bodies, and where maybe there's just no way for the accumulations to move out quick enough, or maybe over time we've just accumulated so much now we have a backup. Now we have to start dealing with these accumulations now, when they might be, a bit or a lot of it too excessive. Or maybe we're just barely getting by. Maybe we don't have enough of the resources our body needs in order to bring about that homeostasis. Maybe we need to start taking in more of something that's going to be more nourishing, or maybe something that's more more wet, as we can kind of see here, like our need for something that's going to be producing life, something that's going to make us start to flourish and feel great, really. What I ended up noticing throughout my education, from my peers mostly, is that they ended up gliding more toward the Ayurvedic system of energetics, which is completely understandable, mostly for the reason that it was more easily understood compared to other paradigms like traditional Chinese medicine or the Western Greek method. And so that's where we're going to be focusing here today, is right in on Ayurveda, and we're going to start here with the 5 elements. Now, as you can see, we're looking at the 5 elements as they're composed of in Ayurveda, which are earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Now, each one of these elements contains their own characteristics which create and embody exactly what they are. Earth, for example, being heavy, dense, and dry, kind of our connection to the earthly, the earthly things, right? The physical world, if you will. Water is liquid, cold, smooth. Fire, hot, intense, light. And we'll notice here that even with air being light, cold, dry, and rough, there's an interrelationship partly, or in some degree, between some of these elements from some of the others. So air being light, cold, dry, and rough is quite similar, or shares the characteristics with fire and earth, for instance. Ether is more of an abstract one that people don't necessarily understand at first, because we're used to thinking of, really in the Greek method, of there being only 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water. Ayurveda has this extra, or this additional element, ether, which is fundamentally, or essentially, just the space between what we have here, where air is kind of like this, the movement, the erratic nature of like the wind or something like that, right? Ether is the space, or ether is what occupies space, or space. And so it's soft, subtle, and light. So now that we have these elements that we're going to take from Ayurveda, we're going to start using those a little bit more gradually as we start learning more. So we're going to move now into the basic principles that constitute energetic models. And the first is temperature. So here I've illustrated out a scale ranging from cold to hot, and the temperatures in between being cool, neutral, and warm. Now I just want to state the difference here, that Ayurveda typically, or naturally, has a temperature model of only cold and hot. So what I've done here is just expanded this out to what would really be more of I guess you could almost call it a Greek, or even a Chinese model here. But really, for our learning benefit here, having the scale really helps us get an idea of the varying degrees of what something is, of the food that we eat that may be on the cold scale, or in this instance here, we're looking at cinnamon. Cinnamon uh, is on the scale of being hot as far as energetics go. Now, there's various types of cinnamon out there that end up having sweet flavors and so on, but fundamentally, as we taste these things and the actions that it has in the body increases circulation, which, yeah, would be a hot temperature doing that. Hot is movement. Cold is lack of movement. We know this by even taking like an example of, like, say, The Shining, where Jack Nicholson is, chasing this kid through the hedge maze, and he freezes to death. Cold, lack of movement, death, right? So opposite, extreme example, I know, but opposite end is using the example here of blackberries. Blackberries range on the colder end compared to cinnamon, which is hot. So it's not going to have, for various reasons, a warming quality to it. It's not a stimulant like to our circulatory system like cinnamon is. Instead, it embodies a completely different set of qualities which help, or which constitute its temperature. Now, looking into weight, we can understand, again, the same kind of scale where we range from heavy to light, and of course, the ranges in between. Something that may be heavy or more of a lighter heavy, heavy on the medium side, a neutral weight, or even a light medium to lightweight. We also can look into moisture. Moisture ranges from obviously wet to dry, and same thing as before, all the range in between. And we can kind of see, looking here, what is, again, the environment of our bodies looking like? Are you too dry with something? Are you getting a lot of maybe dry skin, for example, or maybe you're excessively wet. Maybe you're having loose stools or excessively loose stools. Maybe you're holding and retaining too much moisture in your body. Maybe you're holding enlarged body parts, edema, or something like that. If you look at foods, using an example here of a food herb, calendula, which ranges, now we're looking at combining these into a warm and moist energetic perspective here. So not only is it moistening and soothing to hot temperatures, it is going to be warming to cold temperatures. So there's a little bit of a balance that's being struck here with it being both warm and moist. Now that we've laid out the three principles being temperature, weight, and moisture, we can start looking now at the six tastes as they are composed of in Ayurveda. And as I've laid them out here, they are sweet, sour, salty, pungent, bitter, and astringent. Now, also pretty similar to the five elements, the six tastes also constitute and are created by their own characteristics that create them. So, and you'll also notice as we move along here that the five elements are somehow in some way represented in each of the six tastes. And so with that, we can start understanding like maybe some examples here of what constitute hot or heating foods or herbs, such as mustard or clove, cooling herbs, coptis or sandalwood, which are more medicinal in their action, or their use rather, but also the action of these foods, which are they increasing circulation like cinnamon would, increasing appetite, are they stimulating your digestion, getting your body ready to break down the food, or increasing your salivary glands to help moisten the food, getting it pre-digested for your stomach? Or are they raising your body temperature? Again, like cinnamon would, or even cayenne pepper. But what are they promoting actually beyond that? Are with cooling herbs in the summertime, cooling foods like salads? Are they're promoting a refreshing feeling, or are they astringent? Building tone and muscle and nourishing your body, creating strong muscles and bones, or is there something else going on where they're cooling and soothing to the body? So if we take a look here at our first taste, we're taking a look at sweet. Now, this does not necessarily mean like a confectionery type of sweet that we would get with candy or chocolates necessarily, but we're looking at a plant-derived carbohydrate or proteins, and what create this flavor are nutritive, as I listed out here, tissue building and promoting of health. And this flavor is what constitutes the majority of all of our food. And just as some examples here, a lot of our grains and proteins are derived from this. So I've listed here in this chart, as you can see, wheat, rice, milk. But as I mentioned earlier, we're also incorporating the elements that I listed out before. So sweet is being constituted of earth and water. The reason for that is because it is related to the earth being nourishing, water being soothing. Sweet is a nutritive taste that we get. If we look here at our actions, not only are they increasing food, water, OJUS is our essence that create our life force here. They also build strength, and they're, as I've said multiple times, very nourishing for us. But in excess, we need to always look at the excess of what's going on with us. So because we take in so much sweet, if we aren't able to burn it and release it efficiently or balance it with other flavors, we start accumulating more and more. And now our goal is to still stay in balance. But how do we stay in balance when we are continuously taking in one thing? So now we become efficient. Like in the photo previous, the flood, right? You take so much in and aren't able to utilize or release it. It gets backed up, and now we start creating disorders like obesity and that heavy lethargic feeling associated with the sweet taste. Really mucousy conditions that are hard to really clear up at times. And you feel these a lot in muscular abnormalities and tissue growth and things like, well, diabetes, as it's a very prevalent factor in our society today. And here we are checking out some examples of what constitute the sweet taste. So, as I mentioned before, some nuts, various nuts are of the sweet quality. We have almonds, our grains, nuts of various sorts, fenugreek and chickpeas here, oats, rice, brown rice, wild rice. Again, the carbohydrates, which are essentially sugars that are accumulating in the body, giving us the nourishment that we need, along with all the micro minerals and things that constitute that. So salty being the next taste on our list here. Salt has been traditionally used not only as a flavoring agent in our foods, but in past times used as a preserving agent for our meats. And so a large quantity of meat, or a varying quantity of salt actually, has been used to cover our meat completely, and for a length of time where the salt's action is now drawing out the moisture within the meat being preserved, and thus the salt is now accumulating the moisture out of that because it's drawing it out. Excessive amounts of salt are drying because not only are the elements that are represented are water and fire, fire being the in excess now excessively drying, where in smaller amounts it is warming and stimulating, at least for the digestion. Water, because it is now retaining the moisture. If you were to leave salt out in an open container over a period of time, it will start accumulating moisture within the air and start gaining more density and start clumping up more over as time goes on. And so I won't go over each of these items that we list out here with each of these tastes, but we can see here like obviously the elements represented again are water and fire. Food examples tend to lean more toward the seafood varieties. So things that are like kelp, I've listed here as an example. Salt, obviously. A natural salt, I would recommend not getting iodized salt or de-iodized salt, however things are nowadays with those. But a natural form of salt that's derived from like sea salt or things of that nature. But we see here again with actions, we enhance our digestion by salivation, enhances tastes, nullifies other tastes, and retains water for our bodies. But in excess, we get blood disorders, disorders of heat, fainting, inflammation, ulcers, because of the heat factor in excess. So all of these things are related to heat in some degree. Inflammation being a traditional sign of heat on or within the body. And so just some examples here, again, of seafood, some clams, which looks delicious, and oysters. And moving on to sour, which happens to be my personal favorite taste. As a child, I would eat lemons like just constantly. My mom would bring home a bag of lemons from the store just for me. I felt so special. But I can tell you, man, like scurvy was never a problem for this guy. So if we look here, sour is cleansing to the body of toxins, and it helps to promote digestion. If you were to think of a sour food, lemons for example, or tamarind if you've ever had it, the thought process starts to stimulate in our mouths the salivary glands that bring out the saliva that mixes with our food. Now, ideally, you want to be thorough and diligent about the way that you eat. It's too easy in this day and age to be in a rush to start, we've got so many things to do, which, everyone's busy, but rushing through your meals, it's really a great idea to just slow down, take the time, take the space away from the rush of the day, and just focus on enjoying your meal. This way, saliva is now being incorporated into the food that you're eating, and ideally you're getting that into a pretty good mush before you swallow. This way, the process of saliva mixing with the food is priming your sensory organs, your brain's understanding, okay, I got food in my mouth. I'm going to tell the stomach to start secreting the gastric juices that are going to help digest the food. And so when you swallow your mush that is now in your mouth, your stomach is more easily able to digest the food that it's now um, trying to break down. Where we rush through our meals, our stomach has to now catch up with secreting these gastric juices in order to break down the food that we take in. And by the time it gets to our stomach, our food is not being able to be fully digested. And so it's once it's in, the stomach's doing its job, it's going to pass it out as soon as it's able to, take what it can from it. And so if you imagine if you were to throw a steak inside the oven, turn that on full blast right away in a cold oven, you might get like some browning on the outside of that steak, but then in the inside it is raw. That's essentially, you could say, the same thing that's happening in your stomach by allowing uh, uncompleted chewing of the food. Your stomach is now passing something that's not partially or not fully digested, so you're only getting partial nutrients out of what you're eating. So it's a good idea to really kind of slow down, and if you have to, use something like a sour flavor of things to enhance that digestion, or even just start incorporating into your meals. That way you're now getting um, the full benefit of your digestive system. And so here we start looking at things like olives. Olives, I know what you're thinking, are salty. They're not. I mean, they may embody a little bit of flavor of salt to a degree. All varying foods have some type of balance of these tastes, but predominantly it is the brine that the olives are made in that is providing that salty taste. Um, Olives are actually sour if you were to remove the brine from them. Cheeses come in varying ranges of sour flavor. I had feta cheese last week, and it was indeed a very salty feta. Um, and so, there's, like I said, various degrees of cheeses. Some are less sour. And of course, citrus, again, being a source of vitamin C, having that sour quality to it. Pungent is the flavor that is probably most closely related to what we would call spicy. Um, and it is largely constituted of spices that are used to enhance flavors in the food that we consume, which contain predominantly a decent amount of volatile oils, which help, which we can identify really by the aromatic scents that we get from things like dill, coriander, caraway, cumin, all these food herbs here that we use in our everyday cooking, but also ginger, pepper. All of these are used as digestive tonics, or something that over time help build strength and tone, like strengthening and power, I guess you could say, in a sense of, in this case, the digestive tract, but also as a method of cleaning out our bloodstream, helping to cleanse the body of toxins that accumulate from things that we eat, external factors, so on and so forth, things of that nature. And of course, pungent, if we were to think of something like a chili pepper, for instance, the easiest example being hot. Fire is represented with pungent. Fire is, by its very nature, hot, obviously, but also light, airy. It tends to rise. It hardly ever, I can't think of any example of where it would be descending, at least with that fire element. And so it'll burn bright, hot, it's moving, stimulating. Just some examples of foods, alliums, which consist of onions, garlics, chives. We look at the actions here. They tend to have a cleansing of the mouth, and like I said, promoting of digestion and absorption of the food. And oddly enough, reduces blood clots. You probably wouldn't figure of food being able to do that, but able to move circulation to help break up the stagnancy. Typically, when we look at where there's pain, stagnancy in the bloodstream is the accumulation of things like clots that can be actually pretty painful at times. So using blood moving food herbs in our foods, such as chilies or ginger, can help break up some of the blood stagnancy that can cause pain. And so again, we look down here, we see the alliums, onion, garlic, shallot, chilies, of course. Very hot, come in various temperatures now. Don't try those ghost chilies, man, unless you're looking for a painful ride. Radish is again like these vary in the temperature. If you're looking at a temperature scale, radish, there are species of radish that have a hotter temperature because of the way they've been cultivated over the years and crossbred pollinated. Some are more mild, some are more pungent. I could think of like horseradish would be a pungent herb or spice that you would add to, like if you're making your own mustards, for instance, that really, you'll feel that in your nose and probably in the depths of your brain. But obviously in your sinus, if you were to consume even a small amount of that, which can be cleansing, especially if you have a backed up sinus. Ginger, of course, which is beautiful when it's growing. Moving on here. Bitter, not everyone's favorite taste for sure, but subtly we consume this quite a bit. Some people definitely, probably less than the majority. People tend to, like I've stated earlier, to glide toward eating sweet things, which would be carbohydrates of various kinds, breads even, and proteins like your meats. Bitter is typically constituting a lot of our vegetable matter, our dark leafy greens, where we get some of the bitter flavors. So bitter not only is cleansing to the body, but also helps remove the body of toxins because it works on, more specifically, the liver and the gallbladder, helping to secrete the digestive juices and help clean and cleanse the liver of all the accumulations and toxins that it's trying to filter out from the bloodstream. So this is why it's important to be able to get like a good amount of vegetables in your diet, and I would say in proportion to your carbohydrates, your sweet flavors. You want to eat more vegetables, which do constitute in some shape or form the bitter taste more than your carbohydrates. You're going to be more nourished from this. You're going to be more satisfied in the long run. You'll probably end up being less tired because you're consuming less sugars and proteins that the body needs for like a spike, and being able to draw this out a little bit longer. And you're just going to feel better because now the body's now detoxifying and getting rid of all the accumulations, all the waste products that it doesn't need. And so the elements embodied here are air and ether. Bitter has a drying quality to it. It's very light. It can be dispersing. Herbs, food examples, turmeric, rhubarb, fenugreek seeds, which are delicious. Sprouted fenugreek is delicious. Dandelion, which is very much a great food that grows on the majority of the planet. You can go out in your yard and pick a clean source of dandelion leaves and incorporate them even into a salad, or if you want to get more extravagant with it, you can create pestos or things like that. But it's important to get that taste in us. If we were to look into the excessive use of something like bitter, we could start running into, because it's drying, when we get too dry, we start feeling rough and scratchy, and because it's very much an air and ether element, excessively, it can cause wasting. So we don't want to take in too much of these things, which will be hard for us to really take in too much if we're just eating, these things in our diet on an everyday basis because largely people don't eat enough of them, which is why we start, accumulating more bodily fat and things like that. So um, we want to be sure that we're getting enough, but like you'll know when you're getting too much of something because your body will communicate it to you in some way. But we're just trying to establish again the connection between what we eat, how it tastes, what it does in our mouth. We can feel that it's drying in our mouth, maybe a sign of something that might be a little bit bitter, even. And so we look here again, dandelion greens, which I mean, I don't know any farmer's market that doesn't carry these because they're so abundant. Um, if you wanted to purchase them from your local farmer, lettuce is a bitter food vegetable. It does typically retain a lot of water, but there's varying species of lettuce that have varying levels of moisture in it. But and with less water, you're probably going to taste more of the bitter taste to this plant. Astringent is one of these lesser known tastes, at least by name. We know the taste as being produced by tannins, which have this effect in the mouth of having a tissue contraction and a drying effect. So we have cases of excessive liquid that may be in the body or somewhere relatively. Astringent helps to dry these things up in a way where bitter might embody that. So astringent things that are astringent, the leaves of strawberries, raspberries. Raspberries been used as tea quite often, quite a safe tea actually, for pregnant mothers expecting child after their first trimester to help bring tone and strength to the uterus. So with astringent, I always like to think of it as the taste that strengthens and binds, creating a firm foundation, which would be represented well by the element of earth. So earth because it is strong and almost immovable in a sense. Air because it is drying. It is dry and can be cold. Characteristics illustrated well. Stiffness actually, but also absorbent. So when we eat, we think of these things that are going to be, more drying. Where if we were to eat the fruit of the raspberries alone, enough of that can be too moisturizing. So hey, why not eat some like pomegranate seeds or something like that? That'll have a little bit of a balance between the drying and the moisturizing effect. So in excessive amounts with dryness, we could run into constipation of the bowels that can be too excessively dry. Dry mouth, constipation again, things that create lack of movement. So there is a balance between using all of these tastes together, which a lot of us naturally do. If we look here, we see raspberries, in this case the fruit, but it's the leaf here that we would look to be more astringent in nature. And with blackberry leaves, also astringent. Pomegranates, which are delicious and fun to play with. If you enjoy even just extracting the juice from these things, is very tasty. So as we bring it back to the elements, we can start to come full circle here with what we'll be getting into. So again, the elements, the 5 elements of Ayurveda here being represented, and now including the tastes associated with them. So again, we can see that there is a correlation between some taste being in one element under another. So with earth and water, both can contain the sweet taste. Fire having salty, sour, pungent. Air also having pungent with that relationship. Air and ether both can share bitter. These can have various combinations, but this is typically how you will end up seeing it. And so we can start using these things more to our advantage when we're starting to feel more. Maybe we're having loose stools, and and we can't figure out why necessarily. So maybe they may be on the end of diarrhea. When we look at something like that as an example, that can, we can see signs that there is moisture, too much moisture within the digestive system, or that there is something going on with one of the organs in the body that's not getting the flavor or the taste that that organ needs in order to do its organ function properly. So it could be that your stomach is not secreting enough gastric juices, or like your small intestine or pancreas are not absorbing the fluids that are created after your stomach digests the food, and so it continues down through the colon as liquid. So we want to use, say, something of the fire element, something that might be pungent and drying, and maybe in combination with something that's bitter under ether or air to help dry that up for us in order to have a comfortable bowel movement and reduce the any further complications from having that condition. So if we take these elements, we bring them into back to ourselves again. And the way Ayurveda does this, and other modalities, systems of traditional natural healing, uh, um, traditional Chinese medicine, the Western Greek, have a system of identifying our inherent body types or our nature, the way our bodies naturally are. And with Ayurveda, they've correlated them to these three things they call doshas. In Greek, they will be called humors. It's the way our bodies naturally tend to be, without influence necessarily from environmental factors or the way we eat. It's the way we are. And so under these main three um, doshas, as they're called, contain within them the one of at least one of the five elements um, that create the energetic model. And so here we have Pitta, Vata, and Kapha. Now, according to Ayurveda, each one of us is at least one of these doshas or these humors. And they each have, again, same as the individual elements, same as the individual tastes, their own unique characteristics that combine them or that constitute them. And so if we look at something like Pitta, for example, as we see here, it's illustrated as having that water element and that fire element that constitute Pitta. Pitta you can think as the predominant hot or fire element. Vata tends to be the dry, the air, kind of the erratic of the doshas. Kapha is the earthly, the big rock, the slow moving, methodical type of personality, constituted by earth and water. So not only can you be either an individual Pitta, Vata, or Kapha, you can also be any combination of these, or all three of them, for instance. If you're all three, we call that being tri-doshic, meaning that you're embodying all of the a well-balanced assortment of what constitutes these three doshas or your natural state of being, which in and of themselves contain each of the five elements. Or you could be like myself, just dual doshic with being a vata and pitta. So I embody, by my nature, my natural way my body works, goes between having a ether and air element, as we've described before, the natures of that, mixed with pitta and the elements of fire and water. So if we were to look at the individual doshas here and how they embody each of the elements, they develop their own characteristics. So where I would embody water and fire and air and ether to some degree, I tend to glide more toward being pitta in some cases, depending on what we're looking at. But we see that the nature is like a varying degree of like being, or the moisture being oily and wet under pitta and dry under vata. Vata is a erratic, unstable force in a sense. If we were to imagine what the wind is, that is typically a vata characteristic, or someone that has a vata personality. Kapha, if you were to look at that, it embodies both earth and water as its elements, having that very stable, solid foundation underneath it, kind of immovable, but very diligent and methodical in the way they do things, where vata can be kind of erratic and unpredictable at times. Pitta is the kind of the go-getting businessman that's going to go and, rack in $1 million, be an executive, that type of personality type. And so if we look at it from that point of view, we can also start looking at it from like just superficially how our bodies look. Kapha does not necessarily, it does not imply at all that you're fat or anything like that. It is simply a strong muscular build. I think of it like a Hercules or a really strong hero that's got like the power and strength to overcome something, but they're also pretty slow and they tend to be couch potatoes at times. But pitta, if we were looking at that, we tend to run into really, really intense hot conditions, because in excess, we have a fire element. When that is out of balance, we can glide toward having hot conditions, like I mentioned before, having inflammation. Excessive amounts of heat, like say from eating too much spicy foods like chilies or something like that, would not necessarily be good for a pitta person because they are naturally hot in the first place. So again, when we look back at the concept of like increases like, if you add fire to fire, you will get more fire. And you don't necessarily want to be burning down the house. Doesn't seem like, doesn't sound like a good time, So that is essentially what we want to be aware of, is that when we eat our foods, we have a tendency to be a certain way. And when we eat a routine of just, say, spicy foods, because, man, I love my enchiladas and my ghost pepper sauce, eventually that can start catching up with us, where it's good in certain instances where like kapha may need that type of spicy food to help dry them out, because kapha accumulates so much moisture because they're so cold. Drying them out would be bring them into balance and helping them feel better. It'd help energize them, get them off the couch, stop being so stagnant. Where vata, for example, they're too erratic. They may need more heavier moistening foods because they typically run dry and cold. So this is how to bring them back into balance, by creating that environment where you're not creating the excessive amounts of like flavors or foods or elements that are gonna increase something that should not be increased. And we can down the road here get into examples of how that can start creating derangements as far as our health goes. But we can see down here that as far as the disease process and how our inherent body typing and constitutions, our doshas, what factor they play in, vata tends to take up the majority of any um, derangement that happens in our bodies, pitta being the second and kapha being the lowest. Point being is that because kapha tends to, they don't get sick very often, but when they get sick, they get sick. And so you have to be a bit more diligent with them in being able to eradicate everything that they accumulate. Vata, on the other hand, they're going to get sick with, like, no matter what, pretty dang easily because they're so erratic all over the place, and they typically are thinner people, a little bit more frail looking at times. Um, they kind of ride between being fearful and unsure of what they're doing in life or with themselves, and so they kind of accumulate more quickly um, diseases or illnesses that are going to be not so intense, but they will have them more frequently. Colds and fevers, things of that sort, some bodily complaint of some kind, and pitta kind of rides somewhere in between them. Yeah, somewhere right in the middle, roughly. And there you go. I mean, that is a slimmed down version of just the concepts and ideas behind these energetics and what they can do for us. I think that they're very important to be able to, glean even a little bit out of. And feel free to go over this video here, pause it on some of my charts, and make notes if you like. I encourage it, and you can start looking into this on your own and see where maybe you need to start making a little bit of changes, and paying more close attention to how your body's feeling as you're going through the day, as you're getting ready to prepare a meal, and start making the adjustments more consciously. Stay tuned for more. I plan on getting more of these things out, being able to expand more on energetics and these kind of digestible doses without getting a bit too um, you know bogged down or things like that. But eventually I will get into a more advanced version of these herbal energetics and other modalities as well. So thank you very much. Have a good day. I hope you learned something.